What happens when the world's biggest economy suddenly finds itself scrambling for $500 billion? The US just got slammed hard, forced to borrow a staggering $514 billion, 0 cents, to plug a financial black hole triggered by unexpected moves on the global stage. How did Trump's tariffs set off this chain reaction? And what does it mean for America's future? The stakes have never been higher. In the second quarter of 2025, the U.S. Treasury shocked the financial markets by announcing it must urgently borrow $514 billion, nearly 4 times higher than the initial forecast of only $123 billion. The reason was clear. China suddenly sold off as much as $1,700 billion of U.S. government bonds. This had been a massive investment that Beijing held for many years, but now they are quickly withdrawing, leaving a huge financial gap for Washington. The sell-off happened right after the U.S. demanded two giants, JP Morgan and Bank of America, to withdraw from the multi-billion-dollar IPO of China's largest electric vehicle battery company, CATL. In response, China chose to strike at the most vulnerable point: finance. The consequences spread immediately. The U.S. faced a severe budget shortfall and was forced to increase its borrowing dramatically. Pressure weighed heavily on the bond market. The US dollar plunged, and global investor confidence began to waver. Right after China's massive sell-off, the US financial market instantly suffered the fallout. Yields on US government bonds soared, meaning the US had to pay much more to borrow money. It wasn't only the government feeling the impact. Ordinary Americans started to feel the squeeze as interest rates on home loans, car loans, and tuition fees risked rising. It didn't stop there. The US dollar lost 9% of its value, causing the price of imported goods to surge. Everything from gasoline, food, to electronics became more expensive. American households, especially middle and lower income families, were hit directly in every meal, every shopping trip, every bill they paid. And here is a number that shocks everyone. The United States is accumulating more than $4 million in new debt every single minute. Every 60 seconds that pass, the debt grows even bigger. It wasn't just China. As Beijing decisively pulled out of the US bond market, many other countries quickly followed suit. Japan, Germany, and even Saudi Arabia also began rapidly and decisively selling off US assets. What was the result? In the first quarter of 2025 alone, foreign investors withdrew $317 billion worth of US bonds and stocks, the largest capital flight since 2016. The US financial market felt like it was drained dry, as the world collectively said, "We no longer trust it." Investment funds panicked. Investors sold off their holdings. The US dollar was pushed into a weak position, and the stock market wobbled day by day. Do you think the US simply banned a few Chinese companies? No, it's much bigger than that. One day early in 2025, at the offices of JP Morgan and Bank of America, a phone call from Washington changed everything. The US ordered these two banking giants to withdraw from a critically important IPO, China's leading electric vehicle battery company, CATL. So why was this deal blocked? Not because of profits or markets, but because Washington believed CATL was closely linked to the Chinese military under the US national security law. The US Congress officially listed CATL among companies connected to the military, effectively putting an end to the involvement of American banks in this IPO. This was more than just a ban. It sent a clear signal that the US was weaponizing its financial system to stop its rivals from growing. And Beijing? They didn't just sit still. Their response was immediate, forceful, and fierce, sparking an unprecedented showdown on the global financial stage. The CATL IPO was not just about raising capital. It was a strategic move for China to boost its position on the global technology map, especially in electric vehicle batteries, the heart of the 21st century automotive industry. If successful, CATL could raise between $4 and $5.3 billion, an enormous sum to expand operations, invest in new technologies, and dominate the global EV battery supply chain. But when the US slammed the brakes, Beijing didn't just accept defeat. Soon after, China launched a powerful counterattack. It began selling off US government bonds at an unprecedented pace. By the end of the first quarter of 2025, China's holdings had dropped to $759 billion, the lowest level. This was not just an economic move, it was a warning. Washington clearly understood the message behind every bond sold. Mess with China's strategic interests, and don't expect America's financial system to stay stable. After China's bond sell-off rocked the market, Beijing didn't let its money sit still. They quietly but deliberately pivoted their investment portfolio. No longer keen on the US dollar or American assets, China poured large amounts into gold, infrastructure bonds, and assets denominated in renminbi, a way to both protect national wealth and strengthen their currency in the new geopolitical game. One striking number, China's central bank reserves of gold rose to 2,292 metric tons, accounting for 6.5% of its total foreign reserves. In just the first quarter of 2025 alone, Beijing bought an additional 12.8 metric tons of gold, quietly, but enough to shock global investors. Clearly, China is restructuring its entire financial system, preparing for a long game where gold regains its throne and the renminbi takes center stage. This crisis is no longer just cold numbers flashing on electronic boards. It has begun to creep deep into the everyday lives of Americans. When China started selling off bonds, the US dollar plunged uncontrollably, and faith in the American financial system began to shake. But this shock went far beyond just investors. In the first quarter of 2025, US GDP shrank by 0.5%, marking the first recession since 2022. Yet what hit people the hardest was the soaring prices at the grocery store. Inflation surged, with the CPI, Consumer Price Index, jumping from 2.2% to 3.4% in just a few months. Simply put, food, gasoline, everyday goods, everything became noticeably more expensive. A weaker dollar means imported goods cost more, and American consumers feel that pain first and most deeply. Worse still, consumer confidence dropped to its lowest level since 1952. It wasn't just wallets that suffered, people's spirits also took a serious hit. Wall Street was shaking, but fear spread all the way into kitchens and family homes, where people tightened belts, postponed big plans, and wondered how long this storm would last. As interest rates rose, it wasn't just a number on paper. It meant millions of Americans had to pay more each month for their homes, cars, and even their children's tuition. Mortgage rates, car loans, and tuition fees all climbed, making daily life more difficult than ever for many families. Prices kept rising, imported goods became costlier, food and energy prices danced relentlessly upward, and family bills grew heavier by the day. And it wasn't only everyday consumers who felt the squeeze. Even giants like Apple suffered. In the second quarter of 2025, Apple lost nearly $900 million due to import taxes from China. This could push up the price of the upcoming iPhone generation, and in the end, consumers will foot the bill. American life is deeply affected. From big loans to every item in the shopping cart, everything is being pushed upward by a financial wave that won't be easy to overcome. When politics creeps into every corner of the financial system, things become far more complicated. The US ban on major banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America from investing in KATL, China's top electric vehicle battery company, wasn't just an economic decision, but a clear political declaration of war. This made many international investors uneasy, fearing the American financial system was no longer safe ground. Former Treasury Secretary Lawrence H. Summers warned that weaponizing finance, using it as a political tool, can destroy global investor confidence. And once that confidence collapses, the dominant role of the US dollar in world markets will be seriously shaken. America now faces a tough question. Should it continue to wield finance as a weapon in this showdown, or find a way to preserve the trust and economic strength it once enjoyed? The global money game is shifting fast. In just the first quarter of 2025, international investors pulled a staggering $317 billion out of US financial markets. Even major allies like Saudi Arabia joined the exodus, cutting their holdings of US Treasury bonds down to $126.4 billion, the lowest level in 16 months. This capital flight is increasingly isolating the US on the global financial stage. Adding to the tension, the US passed laws requiring major investment funds such as BlackRock and Vanguard to withdraw up to $812 billion from 220 Chinese companies, especially in the technology and defense sectors. This move not only made international investors wary, but also weakened America's position in global finance. Confidence from Asian companies in the US market has also sharply declined. Over the past 3 years, the share of Asian IPOs choosing to list in the US dropped, from 75% to just 28%. This is a clear sign that America's allure is fading. Instead of continuing to sit idle under a Western-dominated financial system, China decided to build its own national credit rating system, starting in 2026. The goal is clear, no longer having to follow giants like Moody's, S&P, or Fitch. The reason is straightforward. Chinese state-owned enterprises are often rated below their true value by these agencies, causing their borrowing costs to rise by 60 to 120 basis points. China wants greater autonomy to reduce pressure and create an ambitious new financial ecosystem, not just for itself, but to challenge the long-standing global financial order. BRICS isn't stopping at credit ratings. They are also developing their own payment platform called BRICS Pay. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, BRICS Pay handled over $56 billion in transactions, a significant figure. Interestingly, nearly half of these transactions, about 48%, were conducted in the member countries' local currencies rather than the traditional US dollar. In other words, BRICS is steadily reducing reliance on the US dollar, opening a new path for global finance. China is mapping out a long-term plan for its financial system. Instead of depending on the US dollar and American-controlled systems, it focuses on three pillars: the renminbi, gold, and a multilateral payment system they control. But that's not all. China is also ramping up financial diplomacy, building stronger ties with developing countries and expanding the BRICS network. The goal is to create a strong, independent financial ecosystem, less reliant on the US than ever before. Every time China sells off US Treasury bonds, it's not just about money, it's a powerful warning. Their unprecedented withdrawal of $1.7 trillion in US bonds has sent shockwaves across global financial markets, shaking every corner of the world's economy. Today, the global financial order is no longer straightforward. While the US remains the center, parallel systems have emerged, from BRICS Pay and independent credit rating agencies to new payment networks that exclude America. To maintain its leading role, the US must change its approach. If it continues to weaponize finance, it risks pushing itself out of the game entirely. Ultimately, ordinary Americans bear the brunt: mounting debt, rising living costs, and plummeting trust. These are the harsh consequences of a fierce financial confrontation that America is increasingly losing control over.